All right, let's dive right into this explainer because today we're tackling a true historical mystery about one of the world's most fascinating civilizations. We're going to look at the hard archaeological evidence, decode what the scholars are saying, and try to piece together a puzzle that has literally captivated the world for over a century. We're heading deep into the heart of Mesoamerica to investigate a massive systemic collapse, one that left behind incredible, towering monuments and a massive trail of unanswered questions.
Just picture this for a second. You're walking through a vast, dense jungle. The air is incredibly thick, and suddenly you break through the foliage to discover these enormous, majestic stone temples rising right up above the tree line. These are breathtaking monuments built by a civilization that once filled this entire region with sprawling cities, powerful rulers, brilliant astronomers, and visionary engineers. But as you look around, it's just completely quiet. Many of those once thriving, bustling megacities slowly and inexplicably fell entirely silent.
And that brings us to the core of our investigation today. What exactly happened to the classic Maya cities? I mean, how does a society capable of engineering such monumental architecture and developing such incredibly sophisticated systems just walk away from the very capitals of their power? To figure this out, we have to peel back the dramatic Hollywood legends and focus strictly on what the evidence is actually telling us. Now, right out of the gate, we absolutely need to course correct a very popular myth. You've probably heard those wild stories claiming that the Maya people just vanished into thin air. Well, that is entirely false. Maya civilization continued in different forms, and millions of Maya people live in Mesoamerica today. So to be clear, we are not investigating the disappearance of a people. Our mystery strictly concerns the political decline and the physical abandonment of those major classic period Maya cities.
To really grasp the sheer scale of what was lost, we have to look at the map. The Maya civilization spanned a massive geographic range, covering what is today's southern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. But here's the key thing you've got to keep in mind. This was not one single unified empire. Think of it more like ancient Greece. It was a network of powerful, fiercely independent city-states. We're talking about legendary places like Tikal, Calakmul, Palenque, Copan, and Caracol. They traded, they fought, and they built incredible societies right alongside each other.
And during their classic period, these cities were absolute powerhouses. They experienced a true golden age. The level of advancement is just staggering when you really look at it. They developed highly complex writing and calendar systems alongside advanced mathematics and astronomy. They built monumental architecture, massive temples and sweeping plazas. And get this, they engineered all of it without beasts of burden or metal tools. They also designed sophisticated agricultural systems and massive reservoirs to manage their water. These were vibrant, dynamic hubs governed by royal dynasties and linked by expansive trade networks.
But here's the thing. This unraveling wasn't some sudden overnight apocalypse. Prior to the 8th century CE, they were at the absolute height of their power. But as we move into the 8th century, we start seeing the first tremors, the early signs of political instability. Fast forward to the 9th century, and there's a very noticeable drop-off in the construction of new monuments. And by the 10th century, the widespread abandonment of these once great cities is fully underway. It wasn't a quick flash. It was a slow, agonizing unraveling.
So we really need to nail down exactly how we're defining the word collapse for our investigation today. When archaeologists use this term for the classic Maya, they definitely do not mean the extinction of a population. They are specifically talking about political decline, the disruption of those powerful royal dynasties, and the literal physical abandonment of the major classic period city centers. Essentially, the people dispersed, but the political machinery broke down completely.
And we know this because the Maya literally carved the early warning signs in stone for us. As historical detectives looking at the archaeological record, we can see the tone of their stone monuments shifting dramatically. Instead of just boasting about glorious achievements and astronomical alignments, the inscriptions increasingly start recording intense warfare, brutal political conflict, and dynastic disruption. The cracks in the foundation of these powerful kingdoms weren't hidden at all. They were left right there for us to find centuries later. Which brings us to the million-dollar question that archaeologists have been working tirelessly to answer. Why did so many of these major, independent cities decline during a similar broad window between the 8th and 10th centuries? I mean, if they weren't one unified empire under a single ruler, what underlying forces could have possibly swept across such a vast geographic area to bring down so many distinct, powerful city-states?
Well, let's look at the lineup of prime suspects. Scholars have a few leading explanations. Right at the top of the list, we have prolonged drought and severe climate change. But
Tearing the cities apart from the inside, we also have escalating warfare and political instability. Then, you compound that with massive environmental pressure from overpopulation, and finally, the severe disruption of the vital trade networks that kept these cities wealthy in the first place.
Now, if you're hoping for one neat, tidy answer, I'm going to have to disappoint you. Modern archaeologists increasingly view this whole thing not as a single catastrophic event, but as a highly complex chain reaction. It wasn't just a drought. It wasn't just a war. It was this tangled web of interconnected pressures. Imagine a society that is already straining under the weight of overpopulation and social inequality, and then suddenly they're hit by harsh climate shifts and trade disruptions. It's a series of pressures pushing these powerful kingdoms right to their breaking point. Honestly, it's a pretty sobering reminder of how interconnected and fragile complex societies can be, even today.
But wait, how do we actually reconstruct that chain reaction? How do we know what the weather was doing 1,000 years ago? Well, today's scientists act like climate detectives. They gather evidence from ancient lake sediments, deep cave deposits, stalagmites, and other natural climate records. By analyzing these geographical archives, they can actually, remarkably, reconstruct the ancient rainfall patterns of the Maya world.
And the data they pulled from those records? It's honestly staggering. The evidence clearly shows that severe droughts hit parts of the Maya lowlands right during these key periods of political decline. This is a massive smoking gun. Remember earlier when we talked about their sophisticated reservoirs? These massive Maya populations depended heavily, entirely really, on seasonal rainfall and those carefully managed water systems just to survive. A severe, prolonged water shortage wouldn't have just been a nuisance. It would have completely devastated their agriculture and upended their entire social order.
But as incredibly compelling as that climate evidence is, it still doesn't solve the whole puzzle. Emphatically, drought alone cannot explain every single city's history. Different cities experienced their collapse at entirely different times. Some centers fell apart while others nearby actually adapted and continued to thrive for quite a while longer. The Maya didn't vanish overnight, and there was no single expiration date for this civilization. The puzzle remains incredibly nuanced.
So the evidence is painting a much messier, far more fascinating picture than those old myths ever did. And I want to leave you with this to chew on. If severe drought was a major catalyst, why did some cities manage to adapt and survive it while others completely collapsed? And exactly how did political crises and warfare act as the spark that turned environmental stress into a civilization-wide upheaval? It's a brilliant historical mystery, and it just proves that the more we learn, the deeper the jungle's secrets really become.
Picture this. The great Maya cities are already under immense mounting pressure. But environmental stress, well, that was really just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Across the vast Maya world, another force was becoming increasingly dangerous, spreading through the jungle and completely destabilizing centuries of progress. That force was war.
So let's dive right into this. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack one of history's absolute most fascinating investigations, the so-called Maya collapse. Specifically, we're looking at the massive decline and abandonment of classic Maya urban centers across the southern and central lowlands. This is all happening roughly between the 8th and 10th centuries CE. Now, for decades, you've probably heard the classic narrative, right? That this incredibly advanced civilization just vanished into thin air. But as we're going to see by looking at the hard archaeological and climatic evidence, the real story is far more complex, way more dramatic, and honestly, a whole lot more interesting. Let's get started.
Section 1. War in the Maya World. City-states and conflict.
You know, we often tend to think of the Maya as a single unified empire. But in reality, they were a massive network of fiercely independent, highly competitive city-states. And trust me, they didn't just trade and make alliances, they fought hard. And they left us a very detailed record of it, so we're definitely not just guessing here. We've got actual stone inscriptions that explicitly detail these violent clashes, and giant monuments erected for the sole purpose of celebrating a military victory over a rival king. But it goes way beyond the written word. Archaeologists have actually uncovered defensive fortifications, heavily damaged structural remains, and direct evidence of ancient weaponry. Warfare wasn't just some minor isolated issue, it was a major, highly disruptive factor, constantly tearing at the fabric of their society.
And the thing about war is it never just stays on the battlefield. It triggers massive, cascading systemic failures. Think about it. When armies march and cities fight, your agricultural cycles are violently disrupted. Regional trade networks just grind to a halt. Fragile political alliances shatter, and those absolutely critical food supplies get cut off completely. Inevitably, this leads to forced population movements, as regular people literally flee for their lives. Ultimately, it shatters the royal legitimacy of the kings who failed to protect their people. So all this widespread conflict severely crippled the ability of these independent cities to handle the massive environmental shocks that were looming right around the corner.
Section 2. Drought and Water Politics. The Climate Crisis.
That political fragmentation we just talked about left these competing city-states incredibly vulnerable to shifting weather patterns. The Maya were a civilization that was fundamentally dependent on complex water management. They completely relied on engineered reservoirs and the arrival of predictable seasonal rainfall. So what happens when repeated, severe droughts hit? The domino effect is utterly devastating. Your seasonal crops immediately fail. Essential drinking water dries up. Whatever food storage you had gets depleted incredibly fast. Without surplus goods, regional trade completely stalls out. People start to panic. They start to migrate, causing massive population instability. And predictably, this brings about the total collapse of royal authority.
And this connection between the environment and leadership is absolutely crucial to understand. Maya rulers weren't just politicians. They were deeply tied to the divine. Their people expected them to maintain order, ensure prosperity, and quite literally guarantee the rains. When the water stopped flowing and the sky stayed clear year after year after year, it wasn't just brushed off as a bad weather cycle. The kings had failed. So an environmental disaster almost instantly escalated into a massive, totally unsolvable political crisis.
But here's the catch. The drought wasn't operating in a vacuum. There were intense, compounding environmental pressures at play, too. The Maya were highly skilled environmental managers, no doubt about it. But centuries of success actually led to extreme population growth. That forced rapid agricultural expansion, widespread regional deforestation, and severe soil exhaustion. Losing those natural resources put an enormous strain on their food systems. Now, modern researchers still debate the exact weight of each of these factors, but one thing is crystal clear. These mounting pressures made the civilization incredibly fragile.
Section 3. A complex, interconnected collapse, systems thinking. To really grasp what happened here, we have to use something called systems thinking. That means looking at how war, drought, and environmental degradation all fed into and compounded one another. The old theory assumed that one sudden, singular apocalypse, like a superdrought or some massive cataclysm, wiped out the entire civilization almost overnight. It's very dramatic, very Hollywood, but the modern scholarly view tells a very different story. It wasn't just one thing. It was a complex, highly uneven combination of interacting systemic pressures that slowly brought the classic cities down over generations.
Let's define this clearly so we're all on the same page. A complex collapse is a localized historical event driven by a combination of climate stress, warfare, political instability, agricultural pressure, and social disruption. And I really want to emphasize the word localized here. The Maya world was massive, and different cities experienced vastly different outcomes during this time. While some cities were falling to war and famine, others actually managed to hold on longer or even thrive, simply because they faced a different combination of these exact same pressures.
Section 4. Uncovering the Empty Cities, the Jungle's Illusion.
So, you might be wondering, if it wasn't a sudden apocalypse, why on earth did early explorers think the Maya just vanished? Well, when dense tropical forest reclaimed these urban centers over centuries, it created a deeply misleading illusion of sudden abandonment. To pierce through that jungle canopy today, researchers rely on a cutting-edge modern toolkit. Traditional excavation gives us the timeline of abandonment and conflict. Pollen and sediment studies from lakebeds give us incredible ancient climate records. Satellite imagery reveals large-scale regional settlement patterns. But the absolute game-changer here? That would be LiDAR technology, which literally uses lasers to digitally strip away the jungle canopy.
The discoveries we've made with LiDAR have completely rewritten the history books. It reveals that the Maya landscape was vastly more densely populated and intensely interconnected than anyone ever previously believed. Those quote-unquote empty jungles, they were actually home to sprawling, massive networks of raised roads, agricultural terraces, engineered reservoirs, and defensive structures. And the wildest part is, all of it was hidden entirely beneath the thick vegetation for centuries.
Section 5. The Maya never vanished. Transformation, not extinction.
And this brings us to the ultimate paradigm shift of this explainer. The Maya civilization did not end in the 10th century. It simply adapted, moved, and evolved. The evidence for the continuation of Maya civilization is frankly overwhelming. While the southern lowland cities definitely declined, post-classic centers further north, like the incredibly famous Chichen Itza, absolutely thrived. Political power simply shifted to new regional networks.
Now, centuries later, the Spanish conquest brought yet another major traumatic transformation. But through it all, Maya culture, traditions, and identities survived. Their incredible story is really one of supreme adaptation.
So, after looking at all the climate data, the hard evidence of warfare, the political structures, and these amazing new LiDAR maps, we have to ask the big question. Pulling it all together, what really caused the Maya collapse?
The definitive answer is that there was no single cause. It was a gradual, highly uneven transformation, rather than one sudden apocalypse, and it varied widely across different regions of the Maya world. It's not a story of a civilization just disappearing into the night. It's a profound story of systemic change, immense environmental pressure, and ultimate human resilience in the face of overlapping crises.
The Maya did not vanish. Their cities changed, their kingdoms rose and fell, and their world was transformed, but their people survived. Today, millions of Maya descendants continue to speak Maya languages and preserve traditions that reach back through centuries of history. The real mystery isn't where the Maya went, it's how a civilization so powerful could transform so dramatically and still endure. When you look at their resilience in the face of shifting climates and extreme political upheaval, you really have to ask yourself, are our modern societies any better prepared for the overlapping crises of tomorrow? This has been Mystery Vault. Until next time.